This is Ron Mahler once again, and this is video 5 that coincides with chapter 5 of the Banquet. And this chapter centers around a very notorious group of gentlemen, very upper society sort of group in first century Judaism, and they of course are known as the Pharisees. And these men came to the fore during the intertestamental period, the point in time between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The prophets in Israel had now fallen silent. God did not send any more prophets to his people. And so he was basically giving them the silent treatment. Malachi finished his ministry, and of course it was in many ways a scathing indictment of Israel's unfaithfulness towards their God. And so when the Romans took over that whole part of the world and of course ruled over the Jews and Israel, the Pharisees were the group of people specifically out of all of the religious leaders in Israel that had a burden for their people and had a burden that their people be righteous before their God once again. And of course, they were supposedly the experts in the law. They not only taught the law, but they sort of were the ones that were the go-to guys to interpret what the Mosaic law meant for everyday life, for every Jew in Israel. But they also developed a system of traditions, man-made traditions that was formed as a bulwark around the law. So we can look at it as a fence that keeps Israel from jumping to get to the main fence, and that is the law, and breaking it. And so the intentions of the Pharisees when they started out were actually very good. In their heart, I'm sure, they wanted to do something that was good for the nation. They wanted to honor God. They were tired of being sent into exile, or tired of the nation being invaded by foreign armies. And so they wanted no more of that. The very name Pharisee means separatist. And so they wanted to separate from the world. They wanted to separate from Roman culture. They wanted to once again bring Israel close to their God and to have a right standing before them. So as we said, their intentions were laudable. But somewhere along the line, the Pharisees went wrong. And if we look at the Gospels, we don't have to read very far to find that Jesus begins to have many conflicts with this group of men. Indeed, all of the religious leaders, the other groups, the Sadducees as well. And Jesus is looking at these individuals, the Pharisees, and he is seeing things in them that speak of hypocrisy and legalism. Men who started to honor the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. Of course, remember that Jesus came to fulfill the law. And so he didn't come to do away with it. But the Pharisees couldn't see this. And what I always find rather humorous is they saw Jesus do miracles, and they saw Jesus, observed how he was around people, observed the power that was at work within him, how he taught with authority. And instead of observing this God-man and worshiping him and recognizing him as the Messiah, the promised Messiah, remember these are gentlemen that should have known the law, that should have been able to interpret the law, that should have looked at the promises in the prophets, especially Isaiah, and connect the dot and say, okay, he's our man. And so they see all these miraculous things that Jesus does, and then what do? They ask him for a sign, for signs that he is who he says he is. And it's almost like we have to go back to the days of Gideon, and God gives him instruction, then he says, well, I'm going to put a fleece out, God, just to make sure. And so the Pharisees really could not see the forest for the trees. They couldn't see the Messiah for their man-made traditions. And the Pharisees represent what was good about Israel, but they also represent what was not so good about Israel. And that is, they were the teachers, they were the spiritual leaders, they were the pastors of the Israelites. And they, Jesus said, were leading the people blindly. And so in their own hearts, turning against Jesus, the Messiah, the one that God promised he would send his people, they turn against Jesus, and then they're teaching people and leading people in a way that's turning them against Jesus. And the Lord sees this, and in the parable of the great banquet, he implicates them. They are a part of the individuals who refuse an invitation to the great banquet that this master is holding and sending out his servant with invites. Jesus is going to continue to prod at them to show them that they are not righteous, that they are not serving God, they are not loving God. Indeed, even worse, they are on a terrible collision course with the judgment of God. And so in this chapter, in chapter 5, we're going to look at the Pharisees a little bit closer and how they are representative of what went wrong with Israel. And so we'll turn to that and do the study, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.